Hey everybody, so as we take a look here at the 1980s to 1992, what we're looking at least here on the home front, we have to kind of start with an idea that gets back to one of the things we've talked about again and again and again, and it's this idea of what is a conservative and what is a liberal. Because if we take a step back and we look at the 1980s all the way through to the 1990s, what we're going to see is that there is a growing split in America. And those hawks and doves that we talked about in the 1960s and 1970s, that split refines itself into a political idea of liberal versus conservative. And it's this old idea of what does a liberal want for our culture versus what a conservative wants for our culture that we're going to really be struggling with. And it harkens back to this other idea that we've been talking about really throughout the last half of the year, which is this concept of a culture war, where one part of our culture wants one thing and another part of our culture wants something else. And you can let's talk about that in terms of civil rights activists versus segregationists. You can talk about it when you talk about in the 1920s with the new morality versus people that were fundamentalists. You can always have this kind of cultural fight, cultural war between one group of Americans who want one thing and another group of Americans who want another. And so in this case, in the 1980s, that the language that's used is liberal versus conservative. And you can see here, as I highlight in blue, what liberals often want. And blue is currently the color that's most associated with liberals, as is their icon, which is now just beneath my head here, which is the elephant, or I'm sorry, the donkey, which is the political party of the Democrats. It's their symbol, the donkey. So you've got the blue donkey, you've got blue the color, and that's highlighted there is the more important actual information of what liberals believe, right? Which is that we want, if you are in fact a liberal, what you're looking for here is high taxes on the wealthy, because that'll weaken the power of the rich, and we can use that money to provide programs for the poor. And when you read that line here that is transferring the wealth to other Americans to keep society more equal, that doesn't mean actually like picking up dollars, right, and throwing dollars at poor people. What that is programs and opportunities like public housing, welfare, unemployment insurance, health care, those kinds of programs that can assist the poor, help for pregnant mothers, free and reduced lunch for kids, those kinds of programs that take money in taxes and then redistribute it to programs that the poor can use. Now, on the flip side of that, and their color is most often associated with red currently, and the elephant is their mascot, is conservatives, Republicans. And Republicans or conservatives generally support the split of power in the government between the federal government in Washington, D.C., and the state governments, which happen, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Maryland, those kinds of states. And the goal there is to limit the power of government to preserve freedom. So lower taxes, less government programs, fewer government laws or restrictions, more individual freedom. More individual choice. So, you look at this in red, the elephant, the conservative, that's going to be your Republican. And then you have in blue the liberal with the donkey, that's going to be your Democrat. And the 1980s will become this connection between, or the cultural connection between where do Democrats and Republicans fit, where do they fight, and how do they divide each other. And I think if we take a step back and look at this, what we'll see here is conservatives themselves will find themselves being more and more in power during the 1980s. And what we want to take a look at here then is how do these new conservative ideas change America in the 1980s? And there's a couple of things we can look at here as we see this culture war between conservatives and liberals play out. And one of those things that we'll look at on this slide is the revival of the Cold War. And that is connected to this culture war of liberals versus Democrats, because conservatives, Republicans, they really believe that these kind of liberal ideas of taxing the wealthy and government programs and government spending, that's actually kind of, well, really kind of communist. And the argument goes something like this, that the more and more you take money from the rich and you use government programs to give it to the poor, well, the more and more that's like communism, right? Where everyone is supposed to be forced equal and the government's supposed to control everything. Well, isn't that kind of what you're slowly leading us towards over time? Are we going to end up, like these communist countries in East Germany and Poland and Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Romania? Are we going to end up like them, or are we not? And you add to that in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, we have failed to stop communism in a variety of places, right? We failed to stop it in Vietnam. We didn't get rid of it from North Korea. It spread to Eastern Europe. It spread to other places around the world. And conservatives are going to say, you know what, it's time to stop communism once and for all. It's time to put an end to this idea. And Republican conservatives are going to say, we need to get behind this idea. And we need to make these changes if we're going to have any success long term at being a great nation. So the argument here that conservatives are making, right, is that we need a limited government, we need less government spending, we need more individual freedom, we need fewer taxes on people, we need fewer social programs, more personal freedom and control, and we need to stop communism once and for all. Well, now you've got to find the voters to support those ideas in the 1980s. So the Republican Party, conservatives, they go out and they begin to look for ways to kind of bring these voters into the Republican Party, ways to make Americans want to vote conservative. And what we'll end up seeing then, if you take a look here, what you'll end up seeing is conservatives organizing and publishing their ideas in a way that makes them very successful. And I highlighted two ways in which they're going to do that above my head. We're going to look for a wider audience in the news, in magazines, and we're going to transform one of the regions of America into a real conservative stronghold. And the idea here is that in the 1980s, conservatives make real use of the magazine that's down here below my head, the National Review, to spread conservative ideas to a large audience. And the National Review becomes very, very popular in the 1980s, and it's still popular amongst conservatives today. And we're going to see young people get involved for the first time, really to kind of counterbalance those old people that are always involved. We'll see Young Americans for Freedom, a young Republican group, early 20s, mid 20s, really begin to kind of push for conservative candidates for president and conservative ideas, just like we had the Students for Democratic Society, the young kids on the left in the 1960s and 70s. Now we'll see the young kids on the right with the Young Americans for Freedom really begin to push their ideas. And so what we're seeing here is a kind of a spread of conservative ideas, not just on the business class, but to mainstream America through the news like National Review, and even using younger people to help voters realize that there's another way, another option than just having to vote Democratic or be a liberal. So where do these voters live? They're going to become Republican, that the National Review is reaching and that these young Americans are really kind of supporting. And the answer is in the South, because we know that the Northeast, this area that I'm circling right here in blue, we know that the Northeast has been called the Rust Belt. It was where industry used to be. And we know that when we studied this in Chapter 19, that the Rust Belt was falling apart. We know that American society was collapsing in terms of our industrial society, our manufacturing society. And so unemployment is high. People don't have the jobs. Stagflation has hurt them. And the Northeasterners look to the government for help, and they say, can you help us with this? Help us with the environmental disasters of the 1960s and 70s. Help us with the economy that's changing around us. Put us back to work. And the government doesn't help them. Liberals, Democrats don't help them. So the Americans begin to help themselves, and that's a conservative idea, right? That idea of personal freedom, personal choice, letting me take care of me, not the government taking care of me. And many of these people will end up moving into the Sun Belt. And while some of them are going for the climate, because let's be honest, it's nice in the summer and in the winter, there are job opportunities down there more than there were up north. This movement south allows people to change from Democrat, from liberal to Republican, conservative, because the government failed. Because people are thinking differently about what the role of government should be since the government fails. So they're buying into those conservative beliefs. This coalition that emerges in the South means that the Republican Party is going to get more and more votes, and they're going to be able to put their presidents into power in the entire 1980s. So what does this end up looking like, this coalition? Well, it's not just people who were in the South who formerly lived up in the Rust Belt. It's also the people that are circled down there just below my head. It's conservative Christians as well. Because people in the 1980s are afraid, they're worried that American society has lost touch with its traditional values. And we've talked about this before, that conservative values are often traditional values. The way things have typically been, the way things were, the way things usually are. And this would be things like Roe v. Wade. This would be things like no prayer in public schools, people wanting an equal rights amendment, the civil rights movement, the Latino rights movement. All these things are messing with the way America used to be, and people are looking for it to go back to the way it was. It's one of the reasons why you see people supporting candidates like Donald Trump, who promised to make America great again, as in the way it used to be again, traditional conservative values. That's why candidates like Donald Trump run as Republican conservatives. So what we'll end up seeing here is we have young people, young Americans for freedom. We have people who used to live in the North who now live in the South because they were unemployed, looking to change their ways, and they think about government, moving from liberal Democrats to conservative Republicans. And we have now these people who believe that American values need to go back to the way they were, which would be Christians in this case, also called the religious right. And it's almost like the Republicans get this mass religious movement going on where people like televangelists, these kind of evangelical ministers that appear on TV, start talking to a nationwide audience, and they begin to push conservative ideas, conservative beliefs, conservative values, and begin to direct their people, their followers, towards conservative candidates. You put all of these things together, and you're going to end up with an America that becomes more and more conservative over time. I think that's a good foundation for what we're going to pick up with 20.2. So with that, we'll leave it there.